Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. It's 10:15, so we're going to get started. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm Christina Lavania. I'm an associate professor at Bowling Green State University and part of the leadership team for the projects that are hosting this event today. Thank you so much for joining our session. We're delighted to have Angie Rechtine here with us, presenting and sharing her wisdom. I'm going to be moderating the session, so I'll be watching the chat. If you have specific questions, you can drop them in the chat, and then I can make sure to amplify or let Angie know of anything really pressing. We'll ask you for some feedback later, so hopefully you'll take a minute to fill out that information out at the end of the session. And then if we have any trouble, if at any point Angie's screen is frozen or there's a lag in the video, then I'll ask if you do have your camera on to turn it off, just to see if that might help with some of the internet issues, although we don't anticipate that, but it does happen sometime. We saw that in the keynote. So I'll be monitoring the chat. Drop anything in there specific if you need. If you have a question or a problem that is just pertains to you, you can send me a direct message and I'll see it in the chat. And otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Angie. Thank you so much, Angie, for being here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Like Christina shared, my name is Angie Rechtine. I'm a social emotional learning consultant. A little background on me. I'm a former school counselor. I did that for many years and then transitioned to a social emotional learning coach. A lot of these practices that I'm going to share today were things that I facilitated, helped implement. I also like this presentation because it's all evidence-based. These strategies were a result of many, many studies of best practices on social emotional learning. And the session, I really try to focus on things that you can implement now. It's not just one more thing, but you can embed it into practices that you're already doing. So our agenda, we're going to talk about what social emotional learning is, why it's important. We probably all know that these days, how you can support it, and then we will dive into those top 10 teaching practices. So what is social emotional learning? Just to give a little background knowledge here, it is really the process of developing students' social emotional competencies, their skill sets, attitudes, behavior. We vision social emotional learning as really an individual's EQ versus their IQ. So it's how they relate to others, how they can manage their emotions, how one problem solves, sets goals for oneself, really those emotional components to drive their success. We see many benefits to social emotional learning. It can really help our students have that foundation of many skill sets to help them from an academic standpoint. That EQ really kind of helps balance and creates a foundation for the IQ. I think we know a lot of students or even adults that we may come in contact with that they may be super smart and talented and gifted from an IQ perspective, but they may struggle with their EQ. Maybe they struggle to organize themselves, stay on time, regulate their feelings. So they have a hard time being fully successful in their life because they don't have that necessarily balance per se. But when a student does have that foundation of SEL or social emotional learning, you're going to see those students are more capable. They're more willing to ask for help because they have the confidence and the skill set to know that somebody can help them. They're able to identify individuals that can help them. They're more likely to want to work towards solving their own problems. They don't necessarily give up. They see that light at the end of the tunnel per se, because they have, again, those skill sets built in and that experience that they know how to handle these emotional components. You'll be able to see them manage themselves more appropriately. They may use appropriate coping skills. If they get super mad about something, they can regulate themselves and bring themselves down versus reacting and showing inappropriate behaviors when their emotions are escalated. You'll see that these individuals can better conflict manage. They have more positive relationships with teachers and their peers, and they have that sense of self-management, organization, responsibility, and citizenship. A lot of these skill sets, some are embedded in students, some they just know. It's been modeled at home. They may come into you with these skills. Some do not, and they need it modeled and taught to them. So we're going to talk about strategies for that today. When a student does have a strong social emotional learning foundation per se, you're going to see an increase in those academics. Again, because they have the skill sets to manage if it's difficult for them, if they're struggling with friendship issues, things like that, things that may take away from their academic achievement and success, you're going to see them be able to support those areas with those other EQ skills that they have developed. You're going to see these students have an improved attitude toward themselves and others. They're going to exhibit positive social behaviors, and you will see a direct reflection on conduct problems and emotional distress. You will notice, when you start to kind of just even going into what our keynote speaker was talking about earlier, who was phenomenal, that messaging was great. That when you start to look at students from an EQ perspective, you'll start to really see some of their deficiencies. Maybe their misbehaviors are really because they're missing some type of social emotional skill set. A big one these days is that feeling regulation, where you may see students that are acting up in your class or checking out, withdrawing, but that's really because they're struggling to manage their feelings and aren't using appropriate coping skills. So you'll really start to see those dynamics go hand in hand. The state of Ohio, just to give you a little background, they developed and implemented social emotional learning standards back in 2019. And these were the 5 components to those standards. A lot of my top 10 strategies are going to support these. So they developed self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, and responsible decision making. So when a student is able to exhibit and in essence master these skill sets, you're going to see a much more well-rounded whole child successful student. And as we can see, that self-awareness is really them recognizing their own emotions, being able to handle them. Self-management would be them choosing a behavior that they're going to exhibit in response to a typical way that they may be feeling. That social awareness is understanding and having empathy for others. The relationship skills is being able to form those positive relationships and work effectively in a team, have the skill sets to effectively support conflict management challenges. And then the responsible decision making is when they are going to make responsible decisions for themselves. That will go into those goal setting initiatives, them when they're angry choosing to make an appropriate choice versus reacting and maybe making an inappropriate choice. So the top 10 teaching practices to support SEL, and I'm going to be running through these quite quickly because of time. I'm going to give you a lot of information. Again, my goal is to provide the information to you and things that you can embed in easily. Maybe some of these strategies, 1 or 2 things you could implement Monday, and that's kind of my goal for you, that you can take these with you and just embed them in. Number 1 is that student-centered discipline. This is so important, and we know this as adults, but really making sure that we are setting up our classroom environment, we are setting up our school for students to have a say in it, that we are supporting their behaviors, but also letting them be part of directing that. Something to be mindful of when we look at these discipline practices and strategies, to make sure that we are age appropriate. Since COVID, we have learned that age appropriate expectations have shifted. Some of your students that typically as a 6th grader, you would not have to deal with these behaviors because they've matured out of that. You may be dealing with those behaviors now because in essence, they may have lost a year and a half of school. So really looking at the dynamics of your students right now and setting up expectations that are age appropriate in terms of probably maturity now or what they've experienced in their school environment. Also, looking at ways that you can implement PBIS practices and expectations. And that mindset is we are not assuming that a student knows how to appropriately open his or her locker or walk down the hall. We are teaching and modeling those expectations, and we are acknowledging them when we see that they are doing them appropriately. Just like I talked about at the beginning, that students are actively engaged in creating their own classroom rules. This is a huge one. I've been in classrooms before where I've walked through this process with students, and really they know what they should be doing. They know what the classroom rules should be and what they want them to be. So facilitating those conversations and then utilizing those discussions when there is misbehaviors in your classroom or a student is struggling to appropriately manage themselves, going back to those classroom rules and stating, as a class, we came up with these rules together. This is what you wanted to see along with your peers. You are struggling with that right now. How can we support you as a class? How can I support you as a teacher? But it's not necessarily you going at the student and saying, you need to do this, stop doing this, but you are reiterating the rules that the class, their peers themselves came up with, and offering that support to try to help them work through that. Also, part of this is creating that safe and supportive classroom community that you are all in it together. You are, in essence, a family, and you are working through different challenges or different things in the classroom together. An example may be I've heard a lot of classroom teachers have said that the level of just being off task, in essence, showing disrespectful behaviors, has escalated in the last couple of years. So, talking about that as a classroom, talking about that as a community, what does disrespect look like in a classroom? What does respect look like in a classroom? And then really having all of them on board of how they can support that from a community environment. Community circles are a great way to implement some of these strategies where they facilitate that classroom discussion. These are a lot easier, I think, done at elementary levels because you have your same students throughout the day, but they can be done middle school, high school. Starting your first 2-3 minutes with just a centering activity, a mindfulness to just kind of bring you all into the same realm per se and center you as a class. Talk about what your expectations are for that day, behaviorally and academically. You could talk about your learning objectives, your success criteria, but making that just a way to start and center your class. I've also seen some classrooms that do that at the end. There's a strategy on Edutopia that's called apologize, aha, and appreciate moments, that they wrap up a class, the last 5 minutes, they get in a circle, and students have the opportunity to either share an aha moment from that day, they can apologize for a behavior that they may not be so proud of, or they can acknowledge somebody who helped support them that day. That's a great way, again, to connect that class and wrap up on a positive note. When we're looking at student-centered discipline, we're also looking at ways to provide those natural consequences. So if a student is possibly being disrespectful in your classroom, that you're using a natural consequence for that. You're not just saying, okay, you get a detention after school because you were being disrespectful, but you're looking at ways to provide education on what respect looks like. And you're looking at ways then for them to own their behavior and model and show appreciation and respect as their consequence. Maybe they need to stay in for lunch with you and have lunch with you and talk about how that disrespect has affected you as a teacher, and kind of work through that process of apologizing and move on. Again, those are SEL skill sets. Those are them learning and seeing others model appropriate ways to handle problems. If we are responding to misbehaviors in terms of just assigning punitive consequences like after school detentions or things like that, they're not learning. They're not learning how to act differently or how to change their behavior. It's just a punitive result of what they're doing. Also looking for opportunities for students to have their own direction, that they kind of have a voice per se, showing that respect and rapport, and then that routines and structures are put in place in the classroom. I actually have a video here that is a couple minutes long that I want to show that kind of shows how a teacher can be strategic with putting routines and structures in place preventatively and front loading that procedure. So let me pull that up.
At our school, an observer may see students working independently, performing classroom jobs, or using objects appropriately, and think, wow, isn't she lucky? All these kids are really well behaved. But actually, their ability to do all that is rooted in a ton of structure and routine that we front load. And our first weeks of school are all about establishing those routines. First, think about where you might need a routine. Anything from managing noise level to how students line up, to how they rotate around the room. Do you want students to ask for permission to get out of their seat? Do you want them just to call out? What tools or supplies need explanation for use? Next, map out 2 weeks for establishing the routines. Choose one to focus on each day. Demonstrate and then make sure that you provide authentic opportunities for practice. Set expectations with each routine. What do you want to see? Build extra time into your schedule for demonstration and practice. Investing now will pay off later. Over time, assess how your routines are going and take notes for next year. Is there an activity that requires more routine or expectation setting? Is there a place where you might be able to pull back and have less structure? A balance is key so the classroom is both fun and high functioning.
So I like to show that video because I think what it does is it shows if there's a behavior in your classroom environment that is creating problems. Looking at that from a proactive approach and looking at ways you can either set up your classroom or teach to it prior to it becoming a problem. Setting up those routines and structures and teaching students what something looks like is a much better strategy on how to prevent it from happening versus reacting to it. So again, when it starts that video and it says, you know, you may walk into my classroom and say that it's a well-oiled machine and it's running perfectly, there was a lot of work put into that. So thinking in terms of that mindset, that if there are students that are like being disrespectful, or you're seeing that students are walking around your classroom or they're sharpening a pencil during your lesson, look at ways that you can appropriately and proactively teach and support that behavior so you're not reacting to it, but you're kind of staying ahead of it per se. Okay, 2, best practices for SEL. This is huge. Teacher language, just how you talk to students can have such an impact on their SEL growth and foundation. We always obviously like to use encouraging words and phrases to kind of keep our students going. But when we're strategic, we can use that as a teaching opportunity and a modeling opportunity. So for example, when a student maybe is struggling with a test, maybe they're not even trying on their test and they're getting C's and they're getting frustrated. Having that conversation with them, saying, you know, I can tell that you're frustrated because you haven't been doing well on your test. If you take some time, maybe 10 minutes each day to study, you may see a better result next time you take it. And then when they do show that better result, recognizing that to them and pointing out that cause and effect per se. Angie, you scored an A on your test this week, but I know that's because you've spent the last week devoting 10 minutes each day to studying. Great job. So you are showing them and teaching them how that extra effort and things that they are doing has that cause and effect and is relatable, as opposed to just saying, great job on your test this week, Angie. You are having more of a kind of a deeper dive into why I did better. And again, that's a light bulb moment for me as a student. That's saying, okay, she's right. I spend an extra 10 minutes studying each day, and this is the end result of that. And I can connect those two together, and I'm more likely then to create that habit or change the behavior that we're wanting to see. Also looking at always celebrating students' successes as much as you can and focusing on that positive. Again, this kind of goes in right into what our guest speaker, our keynote speaker was talking to earlier today about focusing on the positives. We as individuals are more likely to want to try new things, put ourselves out there if we're feeling supported, if we feel like it's going to be a positive experience versus if it's a negative experience and we're nervous to do it. So looking at ways that you can highlight, even when somebody is trying to do something new, if they you know that's a difficult skill set for them behaviorally or academically, that you are really fostering that and promoting that for them. Next, responsibility and choice. Anytime that you can give your students some ability to make choices in their environment is going to help behaviors, and it's going to help their social emotional learning, development, and growth. Having students have their own voice in the classroom. And we talked about that in the first one when they help to identify school rules or classroom rules, but also utilize the strategy in how you deliver content, different projects that you're doing in the classroom, different focuses. Allow them to come up with how they maybe want to learn it. Give them some different options, how they want to practice for a test per se, or how they want to learn about the Civil War. Give them some different options. Let them vote on it. Let them have a voice. Again, we know as adults, when we're in a school environment, we are much more likely in our building to feel part of things if we feel like we're being heard. If some of our suggestions or strategies or tips are being followed by the principal or other leaders in our buildings or districts, we're likely to be more invested in that. So utilizing that approach in your classroom with your students, allowing them to kind of come up with their classroom norms together, but giving them those controlled choices. They could choose if you're going to do small groups or you're going to do individual work, kind of giving them that option. Allowing them to direct classroom goals, initiatives, and projects, and giving them the peer tutoring and teamwork activity approach that they can choose. They could choose different service learning projects that you're doing and teaching them those practical and problem-solving skill sets. You also want to make sure that you are teaching and modeling and having space available for students to resolve conflicts. I know that in many situations, students come into a classroom and they may be off per se emotionally because of something that happened with a friend or something even before they enter your classroom. But you want to make sure that you're teaching and supporting conflict mediation and management strategies. Again, teaching them how to work through their problems with peers, with you as a teacher, and then giving them the support tools and a space to do that. If we're not doing that, they're not necessarily going to learn those skill sets, and it's going to become a continuous problem. I'm going to just share an experience from myself. When I was a school counselor, I would work with a lot of students on friendship issues. And initially in my career, students would come to me and they'd say, okay, Mrs. Rechtine, we're having this issue, and I would solve it for them. But what I started to learn over the years is I was solving their problems. I was not teaching them how to solve their problems. So I was failing them. I became very popular with them because I would be the person that would solve their problems, but I wasn't helping them per se. So changing that mindset and putting skill sets in place and developing situations that are going to help teach them. They may not like it because it's not easy work, but teaching them those skill sets of how to solve things on their own will eventually help them in the long run. Warmth and support. Making sure as educators that our students know that we care about them. And again, this goes right back into what our keynote speaker was saying today, but students are more likely to feel part of a classroom, to want to put themselves out there, to want to come into the classroom community when they feel like they're loved and welcome. And that's the same for us as adults. I think about in past positions that I worked, maybe teachers would go out after school for, social events per se. As an individual, you're more likely to go and want to be part of things if you feel like people want you there, if you feel cared about and supported and loved and nurtured, and it's a comfortable environment for you. So the more that we can create those connections for our students and those environments, again, that's going to help facilitate that SEL within them because they're going to see that modeling and they're going to feel confident and good about themselves. What are some ways that you can do this? A huge way is to make sure you're greeting all of your students at the door. This is a simple, easy practice, and it can pay dividends. And I know sometimes this isn't always easy, especially in middle school, high school, because you're kind of going all day and you have kids coming in and out. But that does a lot of things by having that presence at your door when students get there. First, you are creating the environment for them to walk into. If they're in a bad mood, you are a positive vibe that is starting their classroom. It also allows you to be the gatekeeper per se. So if people are bringing in issues, problems, bad energies, doesn't come into your classroom. You can try to put things in place before it even enters. You can get support staff. You can try to diffuse a situation. If you're using various check-in models, you can ask them to tell you how they're feeling, and then you can direct them to an appropriate coping skill to use in order to help support that feeling. It lets you be that gatekeeper. It also allows you to really welcome students into your home per se, that you are the one that is welcoming them on your terms. It kind of creates that environment that you are essentially in charge, but that this is your environment that you are welcoming them into, just like you would your home. You wouldn't allow just people to come in your home and just show up. You welcome at the door. Same kind of concept. It creates that community, that warmth and support environment. Another strategy to create warmth and support in your classroom is to gather as much personal information about your students and use it strategically, especially with some of those students that you do struggle to connect with, or maybe their behavior is a bit more challenging. Utilize this information to make them feel welcome. Do some type of interest inventory at the beginning of the year. For the younger kids, maybe you need to work with their parents on that. Figure out what they're into. Get to know their dog's name, what kind of ice cream they like, what sports they're involved in, and then incorporate that into your classroom strategically. Put that in maybe some of your academic questioning on tests. Have signage up around the classroom. If any of you know me, I love football and I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan. So if I walked into an environment and there was a Green Bay Packers poster on the wall, I would feel connected. I would feel excited. I would feel welcome in that environment because that spoke to me. So utilize these strategically, change them up. Maybe you focus on 3 students each month and you highlight things in your classroom that may speak to them. You have classroom discussions and you just nonchalantly bring up that somebody has a dog named Baxter because you know one of the students in your classroom has that. So utilize that in a way to make students feel included and connected. I do on this last one here have done Rankin interest inventory. This is a tool if any of you are interested in trying to figure out what motivates a student. The Dun Rankin you can find online, but I've used that many times in the past, and it will tell you through a series of questions what a student's motivated by. If they're motivated by adult attention, if they're motivated by being in charge, if they're motivated by tangibles. And in all honesty, there's times that I work with students that I had them pen down and I knew what they wanted, but then I did the Dun Rankin inventory and I was totally off base. And once I changed it around, I saw a difference in their behavior. So it can be a very nice tool to kind of help that. If you're struggling with how to connect with a couple students and you want to get some more information, that is a great tool to use. Also looking at ways to provide cooperative learning. This is a huge skill set that we need as individuals. We need to learn how to work with others. And sometimes that is not taught. We assume that a student may know how to work with others. We assume maybe in 7th grade that they learn that skill in elementary, but that's not always the case. So looking at ways that you can put students together in an environment and teach them what that looks like, teach them how to be a team player. I was guilty of this as well when I would run groups and different things like that. You always have your students that are kind of your natural leaders. You have your students that are your very detail oriented and they're good note takers and per se. But if we always put individuals in those natural roles, then we're not teaching them other skill sets. And when I think of school, I think it's a great opportunity to have students practice and fail and learn and try to master skill sets. So utilizing that approach when we're putting students into teams, your natural leaders, don't make them the team leader. Make them a student that has to be the note taker, that has to be quiet and be a good listener and be very detail oriented and might not have the big ideas and can direct the team, but this person has to take more of a back approach and support the team. So looking at ways to be strategic with that with our students so they are developing those skill sets that might be out of their comfort zone, maybe things that they don't naturally go towards, but that's a skill set they need later in life. Teaching our students how to set goals for themselves, how to look at those goals and see them as areas for improvement and not necessarily bad things, but opportunities for growth. Each one of us has our strengths and our weaknesses. Weaknesses are not a bad thing. It's okay for us to know our weaknesses, because what we do then is we look for ways to support them and grow and develop and try to get better in our weaknesses. And that's a skill set to know as a child, and a skill set that you use at age 99. So teaching students that, okay, we're struggling with something, that's okay. We are going to get through it together. And what are some steps that you can put in place to do better with it? Little baby steps that may add up. And then looking for ways that you can create collective accountability within your classroom or within different teams, that it's not just an individual success, but it is a team success, that you are building things together and you're celebrating them together and allowing them to kind of see that mentality. Because again, as professionals in a school environment, we work with teams all the time. We have our individual classroom, but we're also working from that team approach. We're working from our grade level team. We're working from a building standpoint. We're working from a district standpoint. So teaching them the team skill sets as well, and how to be part of that successful unit. Classroom discussions, this is another thing to just be considerate of when you are facilitating these in your everyday, but make sure you're asking, and again, this is obviously kindergarten would have a harder time with this than 8th, 9th grade, but asking them open-ended questions, really allowing them and challenging them to elaborate and explain their thinking. Again, that is a skill set that we all need as adults as well. Building on each other's thoughts, where we're teaching them how to have good listening skills, to when we're listening, we're not using our our senses that we're speaking, but we're focusing on that listening and hearing aspect. And then how they can reiterate, how they can do reflective thinking and questioning, and really build upon each other's thoughts. Book studies, guided readings are a great way to do this. Also teaching those diverse vocabulary words in terms of feelings, so they can really reiterate with you and others how they feel. Feeling words are very powerful. It's a much different feeling from being mad about something versus being jealous about something. When you are mad about something, you may treat that in a different way than if you are jealous about something. So having conversations around those feelings, again, this can just be infused into what you're doing already, but just maybe extending different conversations from an academic standpoint. And also working on how we can teach students to give and receive feedback, good or bad. Again, that's a skill set that we all have to learn in life. We all go through different evaluation processes, and we get good feedback and we may get not good feedback, different things that we need to work on. And that is part of evolving and growing. And again, having that mindset from an SEL component where you are not perfect. There are things that we need to always fine tune and hone in on to improve our skill sets. Teaching students that that's okay, even setting up some of our students for failure in a way so they can practice those skill sets and grow from them. Self-reflection and self-assessment, where we are really challenging our students to self-assess themselves. We do that as educators. We're always looking at data pieces of our students, where they're at academically from different skill sets and social emotionally, teaching students how to reflect on their own achievement as well. This can be done kindergarten, it can be done through 12th grade. Kindergartner could start even just by reflecting on maybe days that they're at school, or how recess went that day, whatever, something that's very non-committal and easy for them to see. But just starting those discussions and starting that tracking and showing them how to track data on themselves. It doesn't have to be academic. Behaviorally is just as impactful. I know that right now through the state of Ohio, attendance is a huge problem, especially after COVID. So looking at ways just for them to self-assess their attendance. And again, there doesn't have to be any punitive or reward attached with that, but just being mindful of it. Data is very impactful, especially when it's charted out. It's very black and white, but it's a very visual statement that can show a problem, or it can show a great solution and progress. So utilizing those strategies and teaching them with our students, showing them data tracking, data binders, learning objectives, how they're growing, and then areas of improvement is a huge skill set to support. Making sure that we have balanced instruction, that we are looking at active instruction and direct instruction. We know rule of thumb is for every 10 minutes of instruction, we really need 2 minutes of discussion time or just more interactive activities, right? I think even as adults, we really only listen for 20 minutes or so, and then we start to check out. That is our range of being attentive with that. So utilizing those strategies within your classroom, making sure that you're mindful of that, that you are delivering that instruction, but you're also incorporating activities for them to interact and just talk or just do different things within that. Project-based learning is a great way to do this as well, because you're delivering the content, but then you're allowing them to kind of dig in there and do their own thing, having problem-solving activities. I remember this is when I first started in education. I actually was a substitute teacher and for fourth grade. And we would do stations for our math where the teachers set this up. It was amazing to me, but we'd have every math instruction would have 6 different stations set up, and students would move around the room to do their math work. Students loved it. Even the students that maybe math wasn't their thing, they like to get up and moving, and they like to have that sense of completion, just kind of moving around the room. So just being strategic with those types of things. Incorporating interactive games, role-playing, hands-on activities. We know that when we incorporate the arts, when we incorporate things that drive emotion into us, it's more likely to stick with us. So incorporating different avenues for students to do kind of role playing and play and drawing or listening to music or different things like that is going to have that emotional component and help it stick with us more. Academic press and expectations, that teachers are very mindful and strategic of where they're mindful of where their students are and strategic with what they are delivering to them, that you are challenging your students both academically and emotionally. Again, if you have a student that is a rock star in certain areas but struggles in others, it's okay to put students in those situations where they're going to struggle, because that will help them in the long run learn. It will teach them. They can practice different skill sets. Again, getting to that mindset that school is room for error and it's practicing. So when they do graduate and go off to college and further in their career, they have that foundation. They've practiced, they've failed, but they've kind of gotten through that, and they have that structure and that foundation to move forward. Seeing a student that, let's just say, that may struggle with staying on task, putting them in different situations where they, for 5-10 minute increments, they have to be on task. They are the note taker or whatever, and then acknowledging that with them and rewarding them from that is so helpful for them. And then number 10 is really looking for those competencies in terms of SEL. And that's kind of what we've been talking about, but instructionally teaching it. We can't assume that a student knows how to cope with his or her anger appropriately. We can't assume that a student knows what respect looks like, because it may look very different at home than it does in your classroom. So looking at ways that we are teaching these skill sets, we are modeling them. We learn so much from modeled behavior, even as adults. A perfect example of this is I was out doing a training at a school last month. I got to the school, I didn't know where I was going. So what did I do? I looked around to see where everybody else was going, and I followed them. I was modeling their behavior. I was saying, I don't know the answer to this, so I'm going to look to others to see what they're doing. We do that as humans all the time. So you can be very strategic with modeling in your classroom what you want to see, what you want a student to do without even telling them that you want them to do it. And when you see students that are showing the expectations you want, make sure that you are praising them, that you're giving them those positive recognitions, because a lot of times they are trying. And even when you see that attempting, keep it going, because they're works in progress, especially with their behaviors at times. Looking for ways that you can develop those classroom communities where students feel supportive, that they can talk and be open to you and other students, and allowing them that feedback and practice time. Also, like I said, encouraging that positive praise, and get students positively praising each other. That is even more impactful than teachers doing it. So creating that classroom or that situation where we're recognizing it from everybody. Students are recognizing and highlighting behaviors in others. Teachers are highlighting behaviors in others, that it is just a kind of community aspect. That's what we're doing. So I got through those really quick. Typically, I would not do that. So, but I know we don't have a ton of time here. Takeaway. I always like to encourage you to have a takeaway. Whenever I attended PD trainings, I love the content, but I want something that I can implement next day. So I'm not going to ask you necessarily to share out. You can type it in their chat if you want. But one thing that may be stuck with you for the last 45 minutes, one thing that you think about, hey, you know what? Monday morning, I'm going to try that. Monday morning, I'm going to just think about this and see if I can infuse this in, or, just be more strategic with it. So something to think about starting your week next week. And something to wrap up here, but this is true wherever, and it's true with us as adults. When students feel safe and supported, they're truly ready and able to learn. If they feel that compass, that we are there with them, that we care about them, that they are supported by us as educators and by their peers, they will come in ready to do great things. They will feel supported and loved and cared about, just like we are as adults as well. So we have just a couple minutes left. Questions, comments, anything anybody wants to share out or ask?
So Angie, we did have, first of all, thank you so much for that session. That was wonderful. And very practical. We do have a question in the chat about whether Edutopia is free or not.
Okay, yes, Edutopia is free. I use it so much. Just go to their website. They have amazing videos, lessons. It is a phenomenal resource. You can even sign up for their newsletters, and they'll send out monthly, weekly little snippets of different skill sets and practices.
Great. And then Sandy asked if there was a way to get the presentation as a PDF.
Sure, yeah, I can forward that to you. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And then I think you had your contact on a slide, didn't you, Angie?
I do right here as well.
There you
Real
go.
quick though, I do want to show you these references, because these top 10, they are, like I said, from evidence-based research. If you look at the Center for Great Teachers and Leaders, they really kind of have dived into this work and created these top 10s for us. But yes, here's my information. Please feel free to email me. My website is down there too, www.edusel.org. Any questions, comments, thoughts, email me. I would be happy to touch base with you.
And then Isabel is asking if there's a list or chart of coping skills specifically for middle school students. That's something that would be helpful. Isabel, I know you could email Angie as well.
I can just share really quick too. I could tell you off the top of my head which ones that they really say work for those age levels. Teaching positive self-talk, journaling, making sure that you have opportunities for them to kind of feel part of a community and share, and giving them those opportunities and practices in the classroom, teaching mindfulness activities. We know those grade levels are much more private per se. So giving them coping skills and helping them with that are going to be more fly under the radar a little bit. The elementary kids are much more likely to want to use fidgets and kind of do their hand pulls and all of that. But teaching those older students, the deep breathing, mindfulness, positive self-talk, journaling, those are much more appropriate for those age range.
That's awesome. And then just so you know, Angie, from the chat, we're hearing people are saying creating recognition and kindness box, implementing student expectations, standing by the door more often. Lots of people have, they're thinking about how they can implement what you've shared today, starting on Monday.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. I appreciate seeing you and taking the time to be here.
Yep. And for everybody, our next session is going to start at 11:15. So we have about a 15-minute opportunity for a bio break or whatever. And please go to the Zoom room. You should have the information on whichever Zoom room you need to link to. Thank you, Angie. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. We have about 15 seconds. If anybody has a super quick question, you can ask it. Okay, lots of thank yous in the chat, Angie.
Yeah.
All right, I'll see you in 15 minutes, everybody, or whoever's staying in this room.